Well, good morning from Richmond, Virginia. I'm Barbara Dill, and I've been making videos in 2025. I've stopped traveling and teaching, but I'm still very interested in multi-axis spindle turning and really want to make this information available and visible to people. So I've done other videos that really take apart the conceptual model and explain it very clearly. This video is different. This video, I'm wondering if I ever taught or explained how this information is very important in developing ideas, how small ideas can become big ideas. In fact, my father was a musician and I was a trumpet player growing up, and we did a lot of various types of music, but the ones that were the most challenging were like Carnival of Venice, variations on a theme. And a variation on a theme in music is a simple tune that's repeated several ways by adding various notes, other rhythms, key changes, time changes, and other alterations and embellishments. And that's the way I've sort of seen my journey in multi-axis turning, because once I figured out a way to understand this confusing way to turn wood on a lathe, I started then developing ideas, applying the variables and the different ideas to the simple ideas that I turned. So this video will be discussing those things, and I call it an informed exploration rather than an random exploration, which is what I did in the 90s, and you'll see that later on in this show. So you'll see embellishments of work of using filters off of iPhone. I really enjoy playing with those things and dealing with some of my photographs. So a brief history about me. I'm not going to go into this, I promise. I'm not going to do a long explanation of this systematic way, because you can certainly go to other videos and my book and articles. But I was still a nurse. I have a master's in psychiatric nursing. I was working in emergency departments here in Richmond at VCU, and in the Smithsonian Magazine, I noticed this image of these beautiful bowls, and I had never worked with wood before, but they really spoke to my soul. And the next day in the mail came a flyer from Henrico Adult Education. There was a carving class, mallet and chisel. So I was able to go into that class, and I learned how to sharpen tools and use a mallet and chisel, and made the bowl eventually after doing two-dimensional relief carvings. But I really enjoyed working with wood. I retired from nursing in actually December or November of '89, and that next year I went to Aramont and studied. My first teacher was Michael Hasseluk, who was delightful. I was the only woman and the only beginner in the class, but they really were very kind to me. Came home, bought a General Lathe, and that's what I've been doing ever since. This is my backyard back in Richmond when we lived on the north side. And I started going to craft shows just to try to get a reimbursement for all the toys I was buying to supply my addiction of turning wood. Had a great time doing that. Here's me turning a big piece with my General Lathe. In 1993, we went to a World Turning Conference in Delaware, and I was blown away by all the things that were made on a lathe from other countries. I was very enamored by multi-axis work. So I came back, and this is my very first spindle. I thought the axes had to be separated by a lot of space in order for anything dramatic to happen. And so I was lucky that I didn't hurt my fingers, but I went on to randomly explore what would happen between centers on a lathe. And these are some of the things out of hundreds that I ended up turning. I got bored by '99 because I didn't know what to do next. So I thought, well, I just don't get it. We moved out to Rockville in 2003. I had a lot more space. I had a lot more quiet time, and I could think more about what I was doing. I did a lot of bowls. I love doing bowls. I explored the McNaughton system and wrote an article about how to figure out where that tip is when the wood is spinning. In 2006, I decided that I wanted to go back to spindle turning and see if I could figure out what these spindles have in common. And I actually did. So there's the difference between what I was able to accomplish in the 90s after doing that for years and then really starting to think about things. And I was able to come up with this model. And basically it just says that there are only two ways the axis can be moved relative to that center axis. Excuse me. It's either going to be parallel to it or not parallel, which is called twisted. And there are only two outcomes that can happen when you change an axis. You either cut into the air wood and cut into the, and create profiles that intersect every time you change an axis. That's called archetype. Or you go all the way through the air wood, like right here, and capture the new cylinder and create a profile on that cylinder, and that's called circular type. And just here's a little explanation of the difference between circular type and archetype. If you put an axis placement, when you place the axis on a circular type closer to the outside of the spindle, the radius defines the cylinder, the diameter of the cylinder, and that's a little small piece of wood, and if you change the axis a lot, that piece becomes very fragile. But if you put the new axis in the center or closer to the center of that piece of wood, then the radius defines a larger cylinder and you have more wood to work with. So it becomes an issue of whether your circular outcome will be successful, as opposed to archetype. Remember that the original axis is here and it created that circle. So if you put a new axis closer to the outside, then the arc is flatter than if the new axis is put in the middle of that or closer to the center of that spindle. The arc becomes more circular. So that's more of a design issue, and this is more of a success issue over there. Here's why archetype is called archetype, because when you change the axes and cut into the air wood, these arcs intersect. Numbering system is a systematic numbering system is very important, as is numbering things so that you can actually read them. There's so many ways to get a brain cramp, and it does become confusing, so you try to be clear about just about everything that you do. There are variables that go along with those two, the axis placement and the outcomes. And the variables have to do with the shape and the size of the wood, the profile used, and the number of axes and how they're placed. And that you can go, I could talk an hour about that, but I won't. So now what we have is a family of four families of spindles that have two things in common. So parallel axes are all the axes in these two quadrants. Twisted axes are in the bottom two quadrants. Arc type outcomes are on the left of this line, and circular type outcomes are on the right. So in quadrant 1, they're parallel arc type. Quadrant 2, twisted arc type. Over here in the circular area, circular parallel and twisted circular. So now we have 4 families that all of those variables apply to, and then you can start really playing with ideas. So, and then here's just a drawing of a parallel axis, arc type, twisted arc, parallel circular, and twisted circular, those 4 families. So this is significant because it gives a structure or a systematic way to understand and explore this area of multi-axis turning. Now I know what to do next. I can think about, oh, should I put another axis on it? Should I make the wood fatter? What should I do with the profile? Should it be deeper? Should it be more shallow? All those factors start playing in your brain. So you have intentional and informed exploration rather than random exploration. Now you have some ideas. You can repeat forms because you really understand what you've done, and I hope you've marked your spindles clearly so you can go back to them and understand them. And we have a language now to share and and teach these ideas rather than what axis did you use? Well, this one or that one. And also, when you understand something, you don't need to copy anybody else's work. So if I were to do a demo and show you one piece and how I did it without telling you all about how to think about it and what you could do differently, all you would know when you went home is that one piece, unless you know how to think about it. So that's, excuse me, that's why this information is important. Another issue that comes up is creativity. I hear a lot of people say, including myself, I don't have a creative bone in my body. Well, creativity is not a bone, it's muscle, it's practice. It's not about having perfect and brilliant ideas. It is about showing up every day and making. So when I first figured this out in 2006, I taught it to my club, who asked me to do it at the Virginia Symposium. I had a hard time verbalizing it because I saw it in my brain, in my head, but I had a hard time verbalizing it. So through the years and teaching it and writing about it, I've been able to articulate these ideas even better. But even so, I'm always changing my slides or trying to figure out, is there an easier way, a better way to communicate these ideas? I soon realized that I was treading on other people's territory, so they thought. And this article came out in April of 2023 in the American Woodturner, and I loved it. It's called Mine, 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 and it talks about a lot of these issues about plagiarism and copying. And essentially, the primary thing that I think it states is there's a huge difference between a conceptual idea like bowl turning or spindle turning or hollowing, hats, whatever you're making, multi-axis. That's different than a signature piece. So a signature piece to me is something that takes the skill and ideas that only you have been able to develop. And if people can copy that, then that's fine. But anyhow, a signature piece is really different than a concept. So all the things that I teach, I want other people to do and play with and explore. There are very few signature pieces that I have. So after I started understanding this, I started using those spindles that I made and creating goblets. These are 3 pieces of wood. The top and the cup and the base are all on one axis, but all the stems are made with various ideas of multi-axis. This is arc type, parallel, arc type twisted, circular type, circular type, circular type, circular type. Those are just a few examples. Oh, and then I got a little more fancy and I started thinking, if I can do twisted axes on the stem, why can't I do it on the cup and the base? So here's a series of goblets that I did that have three twisted axes on the cups and on the base. And then this is arc type twisted, circular type, parallel, and then a combination of some ideas. Oops. Then I thought, wow, if I can do a long spindle with 3 axes separated by 120 degrees and twisted at 120 degrees, I can do it on a shorter piece of wood, just like I did on those goblets, and I can make these cups. And I enjoyed doing that quite a bit. And these are twisted at 120 degrees, but I don't have to, I could have twisted them at a different angle at 60 or 80 or 100 degrees. So you have so many variations you can play with when you're making these ideas. Here is a video. That was a demo I did, I think, in DC. Frank Jessup. So this just shows my process of making these. I usually put a tenon on each end, not for the 4-jaw chuck, but so I can say the depth of cut on each end so that they'll be equal, and then go ahead and create the cove and the bead on that. There are also transition points between each axis, and that they're interesting to me. If you put bead cuts on the center axis and then do a different idea on each segment, you have an interesting piece. These are discs that separate each axis. This is a combination, but the bead is on a different axis. And then Escalin with his cove and bead idea right here. I studied Michael Hasseluk, and I saw that instead of him doing this type of multi-axis spindles, these are long and slender, using discs to identify each axis. I noticed that he would do fatter things, but I did it on a long piece of wood, and his axis will go from that arrow to this arrow. So that is all one axis. It didn't look that good on a long piece of wood, but then when you do it on shorter pieces of wood, like this cup and that plane is one axis, and then from this arrow to this arrow, that's one axis. So you can do all sorts of varying ways to separate the axes and create interesting things. And Michael talks a lot about making different things and then putting them together. So this is a series of work that I did, making bases and tops and then putting them together. Soon in 2009, I wanted to do larger pieces of wood. So I remembered I'd seen split turnings in the 90s when I would go to Tennessee. And so I started playing around with the idea of split turnings. I also wanted to start thinking about finishing whatever spindle I turned on a different axis, not on the same axis. So here's a series of goblets. This is a parallel axis arc-type stem on each one of these goblets. On this goblet, I finished it. I connected the cup and the base to the center axis. On this goblet, I connected the cup and the base to one of the parallel axes used to turn that. And in this goblet, I used a twisted axis, which wasn't even used to form that spindle to attach the base and the cup. So the design is a bit different. So when I started doing split turnings, I came up with the idea of wanting to finish the top and the bottom on two different axes. So here's some examples of my earlier split turnings. These were 4 at a time and then turned on 4 sides. These were 4 at a time and turned on 2 sides. And these, I started playing with finishing things on different axes so that they could talk to each other, because in my experience as a psych nurse, I really liked for my work to sort of interact with each other. So these are having a great conversation, and this one, the family got a little mad at each other or whatever. So here's that idea of the longer candle holders that I started making. And I actually had beginner's luck. I had to figure out how to get this cove to be, this cove to be underneath that bead. And so they were published in the journal on the inside of the cover, and I'd had beginner's luck, so then I had to come back and figure out how I did it. And it never worked out, and I took a month or two to draw things out and try to figure out how to do that, and finally came up with a plan about how to do it. I didn't share that for a long time, but now there's a 10-minute video on my YouTube channel, because I figured took me so much time to figure out that I didn't want to tell my secrets to everybody else, but now I don't care. Here's that piece.
Okay, I'm finishing one of my candle holders. I haven't really touched these in a while. Probably not since I created this counterbalance system here, which allows me to turn this a lot faster than I had been able to turn in the past.
So there are a couple of things about this video that are important, but the one thing I really like is that counterbalance. Let me see if I can show you that and stop it.
Okay, I'm finishing one of my candle holders.
Oh, it didn't do. Okay.
Okay, I'm finishing one of my candle holders.
There it is. And that's a disc made out of plywood with holes in it, so I can put various bolts in it to counterbalance the weight. Because speed does make a bit of a difference in terms of creating these things. So moving on, during my split turning excitement and exploration, I found Peter Exton. He did a demo, I think it was in Connecticut, and he wrote some articles, which I thought were amazing. I think he's a genius and probably one of the best people about split turning. And his website is wonderful, but he uses diamonds. He cuts diamonds on, my cat is about to jump. Okay, don't jump. He uses diamonds and then puts them together in 3, 6, 9s, and also emphasizes negative spaces when he puts them back together. So these are inside out turnings, basically, using split turnings. In December 2011, I thought I would start playing with squarish turnings because I wanted to see if I could emulate a teapot. I think I'd seen Art Leishman's somewhere and thought maybe I can do that between centers. So I started making these squarish ideas, and actually the nose of the teapot is part of that piece of wood. It was one of the axes that I used. There's another image of them, and I could talk more about that, but this is supposed to be a short presentation. So in April of 2012, Marshall Goro posted a video on YouTube by, I think, an Italian man, and he used the 4-jaw chuck of his lathe to throw off little goblets. And so these are like 4 inches tall. And he would do the cup on the first axis, the center axis, and then use the 4-jaw chuck to throw it off. And I thought that was a fabulous idea. And I started playing around with that idea. I'd actually tried it years ago, but I didn't like my results. And the reason his were different is that after he turned that first axis, which included this part and the hollowing, he left a lot of wood so you could play with it when you change the axis on the 4-jaw chuck. So that taught me a lot about what to do and how to play with these ideas. Here's just a close-up of, now that I knew that you could do arc type and circular type, I could play around with his ideas and use the 4-jaw chuck and create little goblets like this. And I love the way spalting really interacted with the multi-axis part of the turning. In 2012, I got an invitation for an AEW exhibit, and it was called Harmony. Well, at first I didn't want to do it because, excuse me, I'm not a conceptual turner. And everybody said, oh, go ahead and do it. So I thought, okay. And it ruined my fall because I was trying to create multi-axis things that looked like harmony. And just when I was about ready to say I can't do it, I saw this old piece in my window, and I thought, wow, if I could capture this section, and it had to be captured in a 6-inch square cube. Maybe if I could do that, that would be harmony because it would be balance. And so I worked on that for a while and went through a lot of frustration trying to learn how to make this, but this is the piece I came up with in harmony. Harmony on 2 axes. So once again, this piece, for some reason, before 2006, I'd been playing around with some ideas, and I put these axes on the diagonal. So the left axis was halfway between the center and the outside of that diagonal down to the center. And then the next axis was at the center of that to the right side of the bottom. I was able to do that same idea using a squattier piece of wood. Here's some images of what it looked like on the lathe. Notice how far over the tool rest that my tool had to be, so it took a lot of practice to get that skill level up to be able to do that. I would sand it by using strips of sandpaper. I didn't want my fingers to be hit, which they had been hit in the past. And then to do the second axis, I would put a wedge of wood in that would support the pressure of the tailstock against the headstock. Well, after that experience, it was quite successful, although it took me a lot of energy and a lot of thinking, which was good for me. This came in the mail. It was from Aeromont, and it was a call for artists, and the show was called The Light of the Moon. I started looking around my shop and I thought, well, I wonder if I could do something. And I did something pretty stupid, and a friend of mine said, no, Barbara, you can do better than that. So then I started looking back at a lot of my earlier spindles, like the ones here on the right. Every one of, when I knew how to think about spindles, I started using parallel axes and playing with V-cuts, alternating V-cuts, alternating coves. But this one right here is alternating beads onto parallel axes. So I looked at that and I started thinking the rising of the moon for this show. I came up with this. It is alternating beads on 3 axes turned between centers. Each bead was advanced by a third because I used 3 axes, and I was quite happy with it. I didn't get in that show, but it did start a whole new world of investigation for me. So here's that idea of alternating beads. Here it is on a single slender piece of wood between centers. Here are 3 between centers, 3 alternating beads, a split turning with just 2 pieces of wood. These are twisted 4 times, turned 4 times on parallel axes. And this is one of a split turning. So they're great big pieces of wood I could do. And the one on the right is the same idea, alternating beads, but I had the axes closer to the center and it became a circular piece because I went all the way down to the cylinder, the new cylinder. So all these ideas started exploding. Here's the way the split turning looked. I would also mark my tool rest with codes, color codes, which I had on the wood, and numbers. So I'd go from red to red or 1 to 1, green to green every time I changed an axis. And that's the way it looks. And once I got interested in split turnings like I do, I got obsessed and started playing with a lot of different ideas. And here's just a photograph of a lot of the things that I made. One thing I learned when I was doing split turnings is when I put 4 pieces of wood together, I would turn the middle of it into a cylinder and then start a profile. And I noticed that my pieces were rather not very dramatic and pretty thin. And then I realized that, each one of these spindles has its own circular cylinder in it. And all I need to do is take off that tangent from the outside, that amount of wood. And then I'll have the red and the yellow wood. I'll have all of that wood in order to create something on split turnings. And that really changed what I was making and the beauty of it. Here's a video of what I came up with. Took years to develop. I put a plexiglass here that has a hole in it. I can hot glue that onto the 4 pieces. I don't have to, I can use a bandsaw to approximate the squares because I have all sorts of ways to keep the wood together. I number each piece, and I use strapping tape to tape everything together, as well as a dab of hot glue with each piece. And this is the way it looks.
I've tightened the tailstock, I've adjusted the tool rest, and I've turned this.
And what I wanted to show you is the way you can figure this tangent out mathematically, or you can put a drawing on the end and know that if you turn to this line, then you're turning enough wood off in order to create a nice profile on all 4 pieces. So you don't have to use mathematics, you can use geometry. Let me continue that.
Screwed down on the lathe, and now I have to plug it in. Ha!
So I always unplug my lathes when we have thunderstorms, so I had to go do that when I was trying to turn that piece. Here's just an image of a split turning. That's not that one, I don't think, could have been. Here's what it looks like.
I'm going to go ahead and record some of this because what I think is so magical about turning multi-axis things is the way it dances in the light. So I just love watching that.
as I develop these ideas. Let me see what it looks like. All right, I think I know what I'm going to do up here. So one thing to notice is that I don't use a tremendous amount of speed, because I don't know at what speed it would just, the centrifugal force would just blow it up. And I also try to take really light cuts when I'm doing split turnings. There's the end product. I can play around with what I want to do with those. Well, and then let's take that same idea, the parallel axes, alternating beads. Then I started using twisted axes.
Yeah, this is a very interesting spindle because it took me years to move on and do those alternating beads on a twisted axis. So this is set up with 3 axes on each end, and now I have it placed 1 at the headstock and 2 at the tailstock. And I've turned alternating beads so you can see the beads on that axis. And as I change the axis, I advance the bead by a 1/3 in order to get that form.
And then I could do 4 or 5. I could play around with the shape of the wood, the size of the wood, whether it's fatter or thinner. Okay, here's an image of a piece I'm turning between centers, and once again I've color coded. These are parallel axes, so it's not confusing. When it's twisted, the lines go sideways, but I color code it so that I at least have a thing on my tool rest. And if I have to move my tool rest, I can find where the lines were again. But it's what I realized when I did alternating coves on 4 or 2 or 3 axes is that there's a screw element. There's a ridge that swirls all the way up between the headstock and the tailstock. So now you can turn a screw. So these are my screws. This is holly, and it's 3 axes that probably are twisted, but it's hard to tell, on 3 axes that have alternating coves. This has 3 axes. I think it's cherry. So those are done between centers. Then I came up with this group. I wanted to put them all together. I love groups of my work together. So this was called Cluck, Kluk, and Click. And it references the sounds made in the ancient language of the early caveman in Ethiopia. I was in the early 70s for 9 months in Ethiopia. The walnut sculpture is one of a split turning, the one that you saw. There are 3 others that survived. The cherry sculpture is on 3 twisted axes, and it became a circular type form because I was able to go to the cylinder, new cylinder, and it's not just arcs intersecting, it's circular now. And then the holly one is made on 3 twisted axes, alternating coves. Another image of just the playfulness of experimenting with split turnings and alternating, whether the beads are long or short. So there's a lot of play there. I love photography, so I enjoyed taking images such as this. I tried to repair broken ones every now and then, but they didn't survive, so I had to figure out another thing to do with it. This is what it looks like, these alternating beads on 3 axes. lighting is important and a light touch is important. And a black background so that you can actually see the horizon of what you're doing. This is Sidney Morton, and his father, Sid Morton, was my carving teacher when I was still a nurse and became my mentor all through my turning career until he died. He was the age of my parents, so they all died, I don't know, in the early 2000s. But Sidney was visiting me. He also had his father's brain of an engineer. He's a very brilliant guy, and he helped me develop that balancing system that I had on my lathe. I got more playful and decided to make multi-axis snowmen around 2013. But, you know, I want you to see how much time it took me from 2006 when I did those small pieces to start doing and understanding what to do next. Rudy Osalnik, I love his work, and I have one of his pieces, a demo piece in my shop. I would go to Tennessee in the 90s and go to some of those workshops and symposiums. But anyhow, I decided I could do that long, twisted, 3-axis form on longer pieces of wood, and I call it the Osalnik-isk type design. And these weren't twisted at 120 degrees. I decided that I wanted the twist to be more gentle, so they're twisted at about 90 degrees, but the axes are separated at 120 degrees. And one thing that I would do when I make candlesticks is that I pre-drill the holes for the shot in the base and the holes for the candle in the top so that they'll be centered. And I make tenons on each end, just like I did on those 3 twisted cups, 3-axis twisted cups, so I know the depth of cut. But the depth of cut here, where it's the thinnest, is harder to get equal. So I started creating a cylinder there that I would cut about 1/3 away when I did that, and that helped me get these to be more balanced looking. I guess one of the ones that broke, I got an idea of, alternating beads. These are twisted at 90 degrees, and so I started making these ideas, and I really fell in love with this project. This is the way it looks on the lathe. Here's another, this is in process, I guess, so let's see. So on the first axis, I turn a sphere in the middle and 2 half spheres on either side. And then I put it on the second axis now, and now I'm going to turn a bead here and here. I started playing with different sizes and shapes of wood, but I really sort of like the smaller ones. Oh, here's one. The smaller ones even better. They're just sort of fun. In the fall of 2017, I had a dead cedar tree, so I started making larger posts. These are maybe 2 feet high out of cedar, and then I started putting them together by mortise and tenon joinery of 3-foot pieces and creating this totem pole. I only made one of them, but it's something I want to get back to because I really love it. And then in the fall of 17, I'm in my shop playing with a piece of walnut, and I just randomly said, I'm going to put a twisted piece right in the middle of it. And it was twisted at 90 degrees. That was from the top to the bottom. So the twist in this section of it was more like 30 degrees. So I saw that, and I had done something like that early on and thought, I don't like that spindle. It's going to be fragile. It's worthless. But I like that, so I decided to put it on a cube of wood and turn opposite coves on 90-degree twisted axes. And I really enjoyed that form a lot. I call it the wave. In 2018, I published this book through Schiffer Books and started playing more with circular types, which I had never really played with before. and I was really attracted to the archetypes. And one of the reasons I wasn't liking circular types is some of them look just like cam shafts, but even on a long piece of wood, alternating coves on twisted axes didn't seem very exciting. But then I started doing it on shorter pieces of wood and playing with the number of axes on fatter pieces of wood, and really having a lot of fun with making circular alternating coves. So I had only done these, I'd only used the 4-jaw chuck on shorter pieces of wood until now. And then I thought, well, what if I use a 7-inch piece of wood and throw it off using my 4-jaw chuck to create the stem, rather than creating 3 pieces of wood, the cup, the stem, and the base, and putting them all together. So that was challenging because I could get much thinner pieces if I put 3 pieces of wood together, but it was quite a challenge and I enjoyed doing that. So here's some samples with smaller pieces of wood that have coves on a circle. I've put 8 on one end and 8 on the other and just played around with what would happen. On that one, on this one, there are 4 on one end and 4 on the other. I've marked the ends really carefully so I can go back and see what I've done. While I'm making these, my skill level is increasing. This one has 3 axes on one end, 3 on the other, and I can see what I've done there. This is a really interesting one. I really like it because it has 6 axes on each end. But when I was doing one end, I put this on the center axis and let that fly around. The axes are close to the outside of the spindle. And then when I was doing this end, I put this one on the center axis and let that fly around. And I got a nice curve there and there. Any chiropractor would really like that. Here's one that I think I used the center axis. I guess that gives you an idea about how when I get an idea, I get a little bit obsessed about it and I have to figure out all the ins and outs and what would happen if I did this or that, which has been the joy and the fun of this path of turning for me. So here are a lot of the goblets that I made using some of the stems I was just talking about, and playing with the different axis placements and how I could get a big curve out of the wood. Here's so this video shows that the first axis is, of course, let me see if I can go back and capture that. No, I can't. Anyhow, the first axis is this first element here and hollowing the cup. And then I threw it off from the tailstock and started carefully turning that first axis. And okay, this shows you, this is a lot better. So this right here, this to here is the first axis. It's on the center axis. And then I can throw it off. And this was thrown off 4 times in sequence, so there's a spiral in that. And here's a little video of what that looks like. I demoed this somewhere and it broke, and I decided that it takes far too much concentration for me to be able to do that in public. So I haven't made very many of these, but they're challenging and they're a lot of fun. I took that same idea and put it on larger pieces of wood, making candle holders. And using the same idea of using the 4-jaw chuck as a way to throw off the axis. These are 3 or 4 inch pieces of little bowls made out of holly that I then threw the axis off once or twice or 3 times and created those elements in the body of the bowl. And I really loved these pieces, and I could start using texture and paint if I wanted to, just to accentuate the off-centeredness of it. But they're wonderful little objects to play with. Then in 2019, Max Brosi and I had been in contact. So after the symposium, he came here and he played in my shop for about a week and he demoed in our club. And I had to hollow out his demo piece. I'd never done that before, and it was quite a challenge. It was a lot of work. But then I thought, well, why don't I do that with some of my work? So I took the waveform and thought, what if I hollow out everything that's not an edge on it? And I came up with this. It's called exoskeleton. Thank you, Max. It took a lot of work, but it was fun, and I made several of these, and I love the photography of them as well. Here's a short little piece of the process. I used drill bits as much as I could to drill through it, and then carve the rest out. Just an image of me doing one of my demos. In this photograph, all of these objects are made by turning coves, whether they be opposite or alternating, coves with beads. So if you just get one idea, you can do so many things with it. These candle holders are all turned with different ideas. The blue and the green one, I have a circular element and twisted arc type twisted elements on them. This is arc type, twisted, circular type, and this shows the twistedness of these better. The bottom is twisted in one direction using 3 axes, and the top is twisted in the other direction. So there's a whole lot of fun to be had to play with these ideas. And then Stephen Twidell in Ireland and I had been in touch due to my multi-axis work, and he showed me an idea like this. So I started playing with finding the sphere in a cube of wood. That's a whole lot of fun to do. I ended up doing a few sculptures that I really liked. This one I had intended for that ball to be hanging, just hanging there, but I cut too deeply and it fell out, but I really liked what happened after that. Here's some other sculptures I made out of curly maple and then torched them. Here are just some examples of the bases that can be made with 3 or 4 axes, twisted arc type, and coves. And then I thought, well, I can get fancier than that, so I started making some more fancy bases and putting spheres on top of them. And here's an example of what that looks. I think this one, I had already made that and I've got it back on center so I can carve out a cup on the top of it. But this is the way it looks when it's turning. And then this is the toy that I made. So I carved out a cove on the top. There are no magnets involved. I twisted that before I turned the camera on. But they're a lot of fun to have. Here's some more of the candle holders that are the arc type and circular type with some paint and texture. My preference, though, is form and wood. So I don't use a lot of texturing yet. I don't use a lot of painting yet, but we'll see what I do now. So let's go back to these initial forms that I turned in the 1990s. I had no idea what I had done, how to talk about them. My first one was circular. This is a circular piece with 3 axes. And look, there's an arc type piece there. I had no idea, but it was interesting. This is circular. This is probably the most that I made, is I would twist the axis, go through the airwood, capture the cylinder, and create a profile. I made so many of those. Here's a larger one that's circular, and this is circular. So just now I have a vocabulary and I can talk about them. Now that I'm not traveling and teaching, I'm playing a lot more with different ideas and using wood in different ways. And so I made a lot of these tubes, cutting through the very center of the tree horizontally and seeing what would happen, how the wood would move. I really enjoyed doing that. I call this the laughing family. I'm showing you this because this is what I made when I started turning wood in the 90s. And I used a mallet and chisel and I carved all those flutes. Gave it to my parents and now I have it and I just love it. I think it's a beautiful bowl. So now I've got a one-way coring system and I've figured out a way to know exactly where that tip is so that I can core out lots of different bowls and save some wood. I'm enjoying doing that. But I'm also, my path right now is to enjoy mentoring other people who like to turn wood, to play a lot with wood, and to teach every now and then if I want to, but it's not part of my primary agenda. Some more artistic renditions of the work that I've done. So in ending, I know that not everybody's going to get as obsessed and into this area of turning, but I hope that people can see the value of learning what the quadrants mean and what the variables are so that they can be applied to your work and you can see what happens with those ideas. All right, thanks.